Hello, and welcome back to the Holistically Awakened podcast, your one-stop destination for all things health and a kick-ass life. I'm Laurence, a certified nutritional practitioner and health coach, and your host of the Holistically Awakened podcast. This is your show to learn from me and inspiring experts on how to up-level in all aspects of your life, including health, wealth, relationships, spirituality, and business, so you can live your very best life as your highest potential. No BS policy. This podcast is about awakening to the truth and talking about what really needs to happen to make your life what you want it to be, whatever that may look like.
Please note this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Please consult with your medical provider or practitioner for your own needs and to assess what is best for you.
All right, welcome back, Dylan, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you again. I love chatting with you because you're my bestie, but we're also like really on the same page with this PCOS stuff and how to manage it holistically. So I'm super excited today to dive into this topic around the holidays.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. It's always great. And I get to see your face and we don't see each other anymore.
I know. This is literally how we socialize now. So
yeah, I think the world can relate.
100%. Thank goodness for Zoom. So in terms of managing PCOS over the holidays, it can definitely be a stressful time. Like I think a lot of people want the holidays to be happy and festive and have fun, but then when you're dealing with something like PCOS, it can also bring up like a lot of stress and even anxiety and like all of these sorts of things that can come up. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we got a few questions about this and some general questions that we will answer today. So the first one that we got was, how do you explain to family about changes in eating and how can they offer support? So this is a big one. I think it's one of the key elements to having like a sustainable diet or lifestyle or following through on something. It's about how will others perceive me and how will I be received and accepted and viewed, right? Because the number one fear of humans is being rejected. Like that's just goes back to tribal ancestors. Like if you were kicked out of the tribe, you were basically dead, right? But nowadays, if we're kicked out of the tribe, we don't die, but our primal brain thinks we do, right? So this is where there's a few strategies here. So for me, there's a lot of different things, but I think communication is number one because a lot of people have their opinions about this. So for instance, if you say something like, oh, I can't have that, I'm on this new diet, then people might be rolling their eyes like, oh, you're on this new diet, like because people don't really understand why you might be doing it. So I usually say, at least try to share what you're doing and why and be proactive ahead of time. So for instance, if you know who's going to be the cook, maybe chat with her before you end up at the party or whatever, so that she is aware that, oh, I actually am following this dietary whatever, I'm not having gluten, or I'm, eating this or that, or I'm vegan or whatever it is that you choose to do. And just having a conversation about that so that it's not like you show up and then, oh, yeah, I don't eat anything here, right? Like, because that's just a shock. So communicate ahead of time. When it comes to also sharing what you're doing, not everyone will agree or even understand. And that's fine. We need to be aware of that because it's kind of like people liking you. I think it's about 30% of people won't like you guaranteed. So it's not our job to like make those 30% like us because it's not going to happen, right? So I've also found that being selective with whom you really share a lot of stuff with, whether it be your health or changes you're doing, because some people might, pardon my language, but shit all over you. And that can be really difficult, especially if you're first starting out on your journey. So again, you don't need to tell everybody about it, but I would recommend communicating with those who are in charge of the food specifically, and obviously like close ones like your parents. Communication is going to be really key because the biggest thing you can share is sharing your why, because when you share your why and why it's important to you, those who love you can't argue with you because you're basically telling them like, I'm doing this and I'm actually feeling better and this is helping whatever. And those who truly care about you and who love you won't put you down for choosing your health, because it's not a thing, right? They should be happy for you. If there's any resistance, then it will usually come from themselves. Maybe they wish they were doing that, or maybe they have no idea how to start themselves. Maybe they failed in the past, quote unquote. Maybe they don't understand. Like, that's nothing to do with you. So for me, it's really going to be about communicating and making sure that you're sharing it in a way that is not going to be like offending them. So for instance, if somebody has like, they made a dish at Thanksgiving or Christmas and you can't eat it, um, not just saying like, oh, I can't have any of that, or like that food doesn't have anything I can eat. Because then the person might feel like, oh, I made this dish for everybody and this person is not appreciating it. So again, like, just making sure that you're communicating in a way that is just sharing why you're doing this and in a respectful manner, obviously. That's kind of where I would start. What about you, Dylan?
Yeah, those are great tips. I personally, for me, it's really helped to offer to cook some of the food, or to bring your own food. I don't know what gatherings will look like this year. I think it will be different for everyone. But in my family, I've offered to cook a large portion of the meal and or do it with other people. And then I can be in more control of at least a good portion that I'll be able to eat and that other people will enjoy as well. And to have those recipes ready beforehand, and to have good recipes, because you never know, other people might start eating similarly to how you're eating, or may start wanting more nourishing food too. So it could be a learning experience for other people as well, instead of a scary like time that we just have to get through as quick as possible, which is what when I was younger with PCOS, that's what I felt. I just wanted to get through the holidays with as little hiccups as possible, as little weight gain as possible, like all these fears. That was just like, I just want this to end so I can go back to being super strict. And that's not what we're here for. Neither of us advocate for that. We want it to be as enjoyable as possible, within like ways that you're still going to feel good, and you're not going to have whether it's a breakout the next day, which is like what I would usually do. If I had dairy, then I know I would break out. So or other things like anxiety and such. So I think cooking for everyone or for yourself, or like being a part of that, would be a great tip. And there's something else you said that jogged my memory. Oh yeah, just about communicating with people, sharing who you choose to communicate with. I think that's so huge. And it's not your responsibility to go into all the details of your illness, or why you're choosing to eat a certain way. And some people may be really open, and some people will never be open. So it's like that self-acceptance piece, that we have to accept where we're at before we can expect acceptance from other people.
Yeah, like, it's really standing in your power, because you need to own your choices and what you're doing and why you're doing it. And yes, it's going to take time to own that, because it's going to take, at the beginning, it might be a little bit more rocky, like you're a little bit scared of how people will react. But at the end of the day, like, you have your body and your life. Like, these are the choices you're making, and it doesn't have anything to do with anyone. But at the end of the day, it's really understanding, why am I doing this? And trusting your voice, right? So that takes practice, but it does grow over time, I promise you. I remember the first times as well, when I when I first started, I would just feel like so shameful, like, oh my God, I'm such a burden. I'm gonna come and be like, I can't have gluten and I can't have dairy and I don't blah blah blah. And I did definitely feel like it was very awkward at the beginning. But yeah, communicating and just owning it is really the best thing that you can do. And I loved what you said, because this is actually something I talked about with a client today, where she decided to bring her own dish to her parents for Thanksgiving. And they were making a dish, and she was like, I'm just going to bring my food that I'm prepared, and you're welcome to have some. Like, I'd love to share it with you. But that also brings off the burden of, like, now mom has to find a recipe that she doesn't really know how to make or whatever. Like, it can be a little bit difficult for people who've never cooked like gluten-free or whatever it is. And it ended up being a really great evening, and everyone tried it and they actually liked it. And that's a point that I also love that you brought up too, because there's this kind of stigma around healthy eating or plant-based or whatever, where it's like, oh, you're eating boring, bland salads, like how boring or whatever, right? But if you can bring a dish that you like and that is actually delicious, I highly recommend making something that's delicious. um, People will see like, oh, this is actually really good. And it can actually spark conversations and interest, and it might even inspire them. So I love that you mentioned that too.
Yeah. And I think cultural food is a big one too. And there's pressures that this is our family tradition and this is what we've eaten for years and years. So you have to eat this way. And I've taken that, I come from a Greek background, and I actually found Greek recipes online that fit all my needs. I'm personally a vegan, so I made vegan spanakopita, and that's the spinach pie.
Oh my
And
God, that sounds so good.
yeah, it was such a hit. And since then, it's become a staple in our home every Christmas holiday. So it's really amazing. Like the people's opinions can change. And at first, it was kind of, we don't really know. Like, I think my mom had it, she had her regular spinach pie as well as, the alternative. And um, people liked mine just as much. So it was like, we don't need to have all this food. We can, if someone has more needs, I believe we should cater to those needs if it's going to be just as like enjoyable for everyone. Um, but yeah, that's just an idea.
100%, because it doesn't have to be like, oh, the gluten-free option is like really gross and doesn't taste good. Like nobody wants that. Like if you're following a gluten-free diet, it's not like I love eating gluten-free foods that are like really bland and don't taste good. Like nobody says that. Like nobody, if you literally follow like us, like a healthy lifestyle that's sustainable, we eat really yummy food. Like our food needs to taste good. Otherwise, like who's going to keep that up, right? So
Mhm.
I love that you mentioned that too, because it's about finding healthier alternatives. So, for instance, if there's like a pasta dish, why don't you bring a brown rice pasta dish or like a quinoa or lentil? Or if you know that, there's not going to be a lot of vegetables at the house, maybe bring some roasted veggies. Everyone always loves roasted veggies. I've made like vegan gluten-free mac and cheese. You have 10 billion alternative recipes that are like vegan gluten-free. So
Your mac
there's so
and cheese
many.
is so good. I remember your mac and cheese.
That was a hit. Which
Yeah.
what did you make again? You made a ton. You did made some veggie burgers, right?
Yes. Veggie burgers, a 7-layer dip,
I remember the dip. That was amazing.
which, regular 7-layer dip is full of chemicals and processed shit. So,
hmm
but it's so easy because it's really like a layer of salsa, guacamole, beans. They're actually really good foods if we make it ourselves.
Yeah, it's gonna keep you satisfied and nourished as well. So I love that. So really finding alternatives and exploring recipes. So highly recommend checking out our recipes. Dylan, you're definitely more of an expert with recipes than me, but we both have some cool stuff on our website. So highly recommend to check that out. And then another thing in terms of, I would love to get into like the meal. So like in terms of you're showing up, how to support yourself, because obviously we recommend, making this a sustainable lifestyle so that you don't have to cheat or like fall off the wagon, right? Like find alternatives, make something healthy but like delicious, right? But life happens. Like sometimes you end up somewhere and you're like, "Oh, this is food I usually don't eat, but I'm gonna eat it, right?" So, in how like to support your body during the holidays, even when your diet's not optimal. So for me, I always recommend there's a few things. So crowding out your plate with veggies. So we're literally just crowding it out because this will help make you feel more full, so you have less cravings and you feel less like you need to go for the sugar or the dessert or whatever it is. And that's also going to help keep your blood sugar more stable. Incorporating movement when you can too. So this doesn't mean like, oh, excuse yourself from the table now and go run on the treadmill because you just ate. Like, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, like I like to do some strength training before I go to like a big meal or something, because that can help stabilize your blood sugar, because that's going to help gobble up like their extra sugar. Or maybe you can go on like a family walk, or like incorporate something together would be the best that you can do. But incorporating movement can be really helpful to lessen any of the impacts, usually like with the inflammatory foods or the sugars. Usually it's more of the sugars that movement is really going to impact. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention would be bring some supplements to support, because sometimes you might need this. And some of my favorites would be probiotics, especially if you've had like a lot of sugar, that can help, reduce any pathogenic bacteria taking over. Inositol is one that I love if you're gonna, again, be eating like a lot of sugar too, that can help with the blood sugar stabilization. Charcoal is one of my favorites if you're just like gassy and bloaty and you just don't feel comfortable. That can be helpful to kind of flush things out. And then my last one would be digestive enzymes, which I recommend taking everywhere in your purse, because you never know when you're going to have a little bit of maybe dairy or gluten or something you can't tolerate, or something that doesn't sit well with you, that will just help break down the foods and make you feel less of that digestive upset.
Yeah, awesome. I love the movement idea. I'm always encouraging my family, hey, let's go for a walk, whether it's before dinner, after dinner. And it's really just to get blood moving. It's not about burning off anything. It's really more about digestive health, our mental health. Holidays can be stressful, but getting outside can relieve that. And you can still do it with your family and involve everyone. So I love the movement piece. And then also, kind of on the supplement line, I love tea, including things like ginger tea, peppermint tea. Again, can just help relax, help digestion, keep your water intake up. Water is big, especially if we are indulging in some alcohol, which again, we're not saying like can't have any alcohol. We're just saying that when we do it in moderation, we can also take care of ourselves with, sleep, water, veggies, all the other stuff that is going to balance a little bit.
100%. I love that. I love that you brought up the teas, because there's so many teas that can benefit PCOS, but then also like anything, and especially digestion. And that's just something that you can incorporate as a food, right? So I love that. Incorporating food as medicine is really the best thing you can do. And that's what we're all about.
And most homes do have a tea. It might not be your fancy tea that, or we as PCOS fighters, we know spearmint tea. We have our particular teas, and it might not be that, but most houses have a herbal tea, and that's great.
Yeah, 100%. It's not very hard to find tea. So, and usually everybody, you can always find tea anywhere, right? So awesome. And then one thing I want to really touch on would be like the guilt around getting off of your diet, right? So for me, I think we both can relate when there was just a lot of rules, and when you are under so many restrictions and rules, your brain is primed to rebel, because that's where you get into emotional eating, binge eating, whatever. So having a lot of restrictions can really just result in the opposite. And so my tip is to really be present and conscious of your choices. So for instance, if there's something that you want and you keep denying it, and you're like, oh, you keep looking at the cookie and you're like, I want it so bad, but I won't have it. Usually this backfires and you end up like in the ice cream tub at the end of the evening because you said no to that. Whereas you literally just could have one cookie, right? And this I definitely experienced in my binge eating days. But I usually like to ask myself, like, is this worth it? Do I really want this? Like, and then also just asking yourself, do I know how I'm going to feel after? Because for instance, if someone sees like dairy, something with dairy, my client also had this come up. Maybe you know that you're going to feel like crap, but are you okay with that? And is it worth it, right? Because sometimes it's worth it. And you're like, yeah, I'm actually going to own this. I'm going to have a pimple. I'm going to bloat, like whatever, but I really want this, and just owning it, right? Instead of being like, maybe, yes, no, like just making the decision. Because especially when you get into that zone of like stressing about it, refusing yourself something, second guessing yourself, this actually puts you in a worse state than if you actually just ate the food, because you're getting into this hyper arousal stress state. And this just increases your blood sugar and inflammation and makes you feel worse. So I would really say be present and be conscious of your choices and own it. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on here would be just addressing like what is the fear when it comes to telling people about what you're doing. So again, kind of getting into like the social aspect. Um, but because a lot of the time it can be something deeper that we're not looking at. This kind of gets into like subconscious energy stuff. So I'm not going to go too deep with it, but it can be interesting to really understand like what is the fear actually here? Is it to be told like no, like, what are you doing? It's stupid, or rejected, or not understood. And what I like to tell people is to ask yourself, like, as like a 5-year-old child, what is it that you're scared of? Because that can really help you understand like where this fear or anxiety is coming from. Because for instance, if somebody they're nervous about telling their family, oh, I'm eating differently now, it can be helpful to look at it from a child perspective, because instead of beating yourself up about being nervous or whatever, you can just understand that part of you that is scared, just to kind of understand like where are these feelings and emotions coming from and how can I work through them.
Yeah, I love that. I really love what you said about owning it and owning that maybe this isn't something I would have on a regular day, but to know that these holidays that come up periodically, they aren't the reason that we experience poor health. It's really our everyday routines that lead us to chronic illness. So to indulge every now and then is not, it's not going to set us like off track kind of. I don't like those terms either, because I just feel like there isn't a track. We're just in this life and we're all just trying to do the best we can, right? Every day. And it's really our everyday habits, not these like couple of meals that are going to, wreak havoc on hormones, which is what we're really trying to, what we're talking about here is hormone health. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because it's really not one meal that's going to wreck everything, right? Like it's really about the overall picture. So, yes, 100% agree. Was there anything else you wanted to add in terms, because I know the next question is not really around the holidays. Was there anything else you wanted to add around the holidays and PCOS?
I maybe just a self-compassion piece, especially around being around people. If they aren't as supportive, it might not even be about PCOS. Just different life views can be really stressful, and we know that we have high stress, we have high anxiety, we have high depression. So I think giving ourselves like that self-compassion piece to understand that it is a really stressful time. It's okay if it's not 100% joyful, like society wants us to believe the holidays are a time of joy. There is some grief and sorrow, and there's room for all of that. So for myself, if I need some time alone, maybe it's the bathroom, because that's the only place you can go, right? If you need to do that and take a breather, and or message a friend or something, just be like, I'm having a hard time, just to give myself that chance to do that, because things can come up around the holidays. It's an intense time.
I absolutely love that. Yes. Grace and compassion 100%, because again, the highlight reel of the 21st century is it can be destructive to mental health, right? Like, yes, it looks like everybody is having the perfect time of their lives, but they're only showing like the good stuff, right? So again, yeah, life happens and we have to really be accepting of that and just acknowledging that. So I love that you brought that up.
Especially
And
this year, we all have, like everyone has a struggle, whether it's personal, financial, illness, like whatever it is. And it can be hard to support other people when we are struggling ourselves. And likewise, it might be hard for them to support us if they're struggling. So, um, compassion for all of us, what we're going through right now. It's not going to be an easy time, but all we can do is our best.
yeah, and I think that's important to note too, because we never know what's going on under the surface. Like, for instance, I don't know, like Uncle Steve might be in a bad mood, or maybe he reacted poorly to you and you might take it personally, but maybe he's going through a divorce or a bankruptcy, or like you never know. And people who do react negatively, it's usually because they're hurting, right? So I think a lot of the time it's really important to remember that like it's not about you unless you did something, but no, no, it's usually not about you. And it's just important again to show compassion and during this time, I think people really do need to be heard more than ever. And even just listening to somebody, if they just need to like, get something off their chest, that can literally mean the world to somebody. Or if you need that, then definitely reach out. So yes, highly, highly recommend reaching out for support when you do need that too, because I think especially with PCOS and as women, we usually tend to just be like, I got this. I'm going to do it all by myself, but you don't have to do it all by yourself. In fact, you shouldn't. So,
Yeah, or feel like we're a burden. You want to burden someone else, all that.
yeah. Nope. And so the last question from Sheridan was, how do I know if I'm managing my stress? I've never considered myself to have much stress because it was more of a way of life, but now I'm curious how to notice it and then can cure it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I actually feel like I can relate a lot because most of my definitely high school and undergrad, and then even through my PhD, I was a highly stressed person, like type A, go, go, go. Um, and I thought I was also around those kinds of people, so it was really normal. And our society does normalize it. So I think, I mean, unfortunately, for me, it got to a point where it was so obvious, and that would be anxiety, like anxiety attacks and panic attacks. That's too late. So that is like your body screaming for help, right? So, um, I I think when this feeling of overwhelm, or like we can't, like we've taken on too much, like constantly feel like we're taking on too much and can't relax. Like I know myself, I felt like whatever I did, I couldn't relax. I would try to watch a show. I'm still in this. I still can't watch a show. But I would always have to be doing multiple things. So I try to catch myself when I'm just saying, when I can't seem to relax. And that usually means that I have too much stress in my life and I'm not managing it well.
Like it can relate so much to like doing one thing at a time or like just watching a show. I
Yeah.
don't It's been very, very rare that I could actually just do that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I can definitely relate to like the being in the go, go, go type A. And I think that's more of an occurrence with like nowadays, like our generation. But I think it's also important to remember that stress isn't just emotional and mental, because a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm not stressed, but your body is probably under stress because toxins, diet, inflammation, overeating, undereating, overexercising, underexercising, literally not even having joy in your life or play, or like obviously financial stress, relationships, toxic relationships, like the list goes on and on, like pollution, all of these things that basically put your body out of homeostasis or balance can be defined as a stressor, right? So it's safe to say that most of us, if we live in the city especially, are under stress. So you might not feel the effects emotionally, but your body probably does feel it, because symptoms can also come up from chronic stress, like mood issues, obviously fatigue, difficulty like concentrating, focusing, digestive problems are a big one. Even blood sugar imbalances are going to be linked to stress, like loss of libido, low self-esteem, um, low like infections, getting sick. Sorry?
If we can't sleep, if we
Yeah,
can't sleep
insomnia,
at night,
sleep
yeah, that's important.
issues. Like the
Mhm.
list goes on. Like pretty much every symptom can be linked to stress, because the number one cause of doctor's visits are actually from chronic stress. And this
Mhm.
means that obviously there are many things we can control, but then things out of our control. But when we start to stress over things that we can't control, then that just adds even more stress, right? So, in terms of managing it, there are lots of different things, but I definitely encourage you to explore like what is your practice of stress management, because what works for me won't always work for you, right? So for me, like I need to meditate daily and do breath work. That's like so helpful. Nature and walking or music is really something as well. But I have to make sure that I schedule that in. It doesn't matter what day it is, like it needs to be scheduled in, and this should also be scheduled in for everyone, women, especially PCOS women, because we are going to be more affected by stress. We're going to be having higher levels of cortisol. So it's absolutely mandatory that we schedule in that stress management practice, that self-care practice, whatever that looks like for you. Because as you mentioned, we can't just wait for the panic attack or like the disaster to occur, because then it's too late, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you added some really good things that we can do, and then there's also things that we can start to cut out in a way. Things like toxic relationships, uh, even just, I mean, what's in our homes, like like toxins and pollution and plastics and such. These are all stressors and endocrine disruptors. So there's things that we can add and there's things that we can take out. And I have a stress management protocol for everyone of my clients, because it doesn't matter if they feel like they're stressed or not. We're in 2020. Like, we all need to be doing this. So it's probably, I think that stress management is the most important piece for PCOS. And on top of that, there's no downsides to it. It could only improve our lives. So why not try going out in nature more? No one regrets that, right?
Yes, 100%. I 100% agree with that. Number one thing you can do for your PCOS is manage your stress. And I think it's also interesting to see that this year, I don't know about you, but I've heard from a lot of women being like, why are my periods all weird all of a sudden? Or like my hair and that kind of thing. And usually 9 times out of 10, stress related, and makes sense with COVID, right? So
Yeah, exactly. I have heard that too, and myself included. So
yeah,
um,
we're all experiencing it. So
yeah.
it's really about exploring what works for you and just making sure that's like a priority.
Mhm.
Well, that was all that we had. So that was our Q&A for the holiday season. Obviously, if you guys have any other questions, we'd love to hear from you, because we like doing these Q&As and answering what you guys are struggling with or you need help with. But thank you so much, Dylan, for joining me with this conversation today. I had a blast and I can't wait to share this.
It was great. Thank you for all the work you do for everyone with PCOS. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you loved it. And as usual, if you do enjoy the episode, the podcast, I really appreciate a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. It really helps my podcast reach more people who need it and to spread my message. So I really appreciate your time for tuning in, and I can't wait to share what's coming next week.